the voice of full press hockey. You can get this iTunes, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast. We are back with another special guest, Sean Reynolds, Sportsnet reporter, Winnipeg Jets, and Hockey Night in Canada. I had the pleasure of meeting him and speaking with him at the 2023 NHL Draft in Nashville. Sean, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. And obviously the big topic, the offseason, you and I got into it a little bit when we were in Nashville talking about the Winnipeg Jets and the direction. But before we get into that, I just want to get your thoughts on this past season and what went wrong and what we can expect going forward.
For the Winnipeg Jets, well, I think this last year was all about the organization and general manager Kevin Cheveldayoff trying to figure out what was going wrong with the Jets for all these years. I mean, you go back to 2018, they looked like they were ready to take the mantle as one of the best teams in the NHL for years to come. And their progress halted there. And that team just basically got worse year after year after year. So last year was about trying to figure out if it was the coach, right? Because they went with Paul Maurice for so long as the results kept slipping and slipping. And they needed to try and figure out if they were going to run back the same roster, which they did last season, and see if it was all about the coach. And the answer was kind of, yes, it was the coach, but also no, it wasn't the coach. And I know it sounds confusing, but what we saw when Rick Bowness came here was he took and he showed the Winnipeg Jets a way that they could play the game and be extremely successful at it. And so for the first half of the year, the Winnipeg Jets were one of the best teams in the NHL. They were a wagon. They were hard to stop at every point. Great goaltending, lots of scoring. Their defense was one of the most fearsome defenses in the NHL in the first half of the year. And then the players just lost interest in it and stopped playing that style of hockey, reverted to the kind of hockey that really for years hasn't brought them results. This is a team that likes to play soft. It likes to play on the perimeter. And they went from playing hard hockey under Rick Bowness, the kind of hard-nosed hockey you need to succeed with. They stopped playing with it, reverted to their old style, and almost had the biggest collapse in the history of the NHL. I'm talking original six era, new era. No one would have fallen out of the playoffs as quickly as the Winnipeg Jets did, going from first in their conference in January and almost dropping out of the playoffs. The only thing that saved them were the Calgary Flames were incompetent down the stretch. So this last year was about trying to figure out what the problem was with the Winnipeg Jets. Clearly, I think you have to walk away from it and say it's the culture of that team. It is the roster makeup of that team, which brings us probably to what we're about to talk about next, Jim, in the idea of what they need to move out to try and get a winning mix here. And maybe even more importantly, to kind of snuff out the culture that's plagued this team for years and get a new one going forward.
Yeah, Sean, you brought it up, the climate, the culture, the room. It started with Rick Bowness when he came in. He removed the captaincy from Blake Wheeler. Blake Wheeler's not there. Pierre-Luc Dubois is no longer there. What other changes to that room need to be done? Is it moving Mark Scheifele, like a Connor Hellebuyck? I know there's rumors about them, but what else needs to be done to that room to make everybody start buying into what Rick Bowness is bringing to the table? Because I believe he's a good coach. And from the games I watched last year in person, I thought this Jets team could pull an upset in the first round.
Yeah, it is a really tough question. I'm not trying to duck the question. I'm going to try and handle it as best as I can here. But I think the one thing that we see time and time again in the NHL, we've seen it over the years. We saw problems with, a team like the Buffalo Sabres for years, the Edmonton Oilers for years, when they just couldn't get out of that, the issues that they had. They had the greatest player in the game for a couple of years. They couldn't figure it out. They seem like they're getting there now. But when culture goes wrong, it can permeate so many different parts of the dressing room. It can permeate, the roster. It can permeate, the equipment staff. It can permeate the front office. And you never really know how to root out all the tendrils of cancer that spread in an organization, especially as long as the Jets have kind of let this fester for year after year after year. It's hard to tell how deep it goes. So I'd love to tell you, Jim, hey, get rid of this player and get rid of that player and that player, and everything's going to be fine in Winnipeg. I don't know that that's the case. I highly doubt that that's the case. The one thing I know is at the end of the year, Rick Bowness who is beyond frustrated with his team and how they performed and what they did down the stretch. I mean, everyone across the hockey world saw the end when he absolutely lashed out at his team and basically said that they quit in the playoffs like that. But what maybe the casual hockey fan didn't see was over that course of time that I said they were first in their conference in January and then fell steadily over the rest of the year and almost fell out of the playoffs. Rick Bowness had been saying the same thing over and over and over again in the media. He said, if these guys think they're giving 100%, they're kidding themselves, is one of the things he said at some point. So this was a problem that was going on for a long time. And I have to say, Jim, I don't think I've ever seen anything like it before. The way that he called out his team, but then the way that his team essentially came out and one after another went after their coach. Not saying we didn't give enough. This wasn't good enough. It seemed to me that the Jets, almost as a whole, were more than happy and thought that their play was adequate and good enough, and basically told their head coach to go pound sand. I think that we were mostly expecting either Rick Bowness to walk away or the Winnipeg Jets to fire Rick Bowness, because when you get an entire team that is essentially, created mutiny against their head coach, I don't know how that comes back together again. That's a little bit of Humpty Dumpty to me. I don't know that you could put that back together again. So there's really good character in that room and guys like Adam Lowry and Josh Morrissey, but they are two guys who went after their coach when their coach called them out. So I don't know how easily it comes back together again. I don't know how deep this goes. And really, we don't know what happens to the Winnipeg Jets after you lose large personalities like Blake Wheeler, Pierre-Luc Dubois, potentially Mark Scheifele, who I'm sure we're going to get to, potentially Connor Hellebuyck, who I'm sure we're going to get to. These are big personalities, big egos. Taking them out could have potentially positive effects based on the kind of attitudes they had there, potentially negative effects. It's definitely going to be hard to replace the skill level those players bring, but there is so much up in the air in Winnipeg. I think for all the pundits out there who are going to tell me that they're going to finish definitively in 7th place or 4th place or 13th place, I want to know their secret, because who knows what is going to happen with the Winnipeg Jets this year.
Yeah, to me, the Jets are a wild card team in that Central Division. I have somebody can ask me, oh, where are they going to finish this year? I have no idea. They could finish first. They could finish last. I have no idea. But you mentioned Rick Bowness in the postseason and the end of the postseason and the media availability. Ray Ferraro said it too, and I want to credit him. He's like, how can you run this back? The same players with the coach and the tension, you could see it. I know he was frustrated in the heat of the moment, and I believe he did say he wished he didn't go off in the media. I think some of that stuff we like to see in the room and kept in the room, but I agree. The players have to take some responsibility in this, and he even said it. It goes back to February, and the fact that they think good enough was good enough. I don't know what they were playing, because I think Rick Bowness was right. I don't know how that situation, your thoughts on how he handled it being in the media, but I think he had to let it out somewhere, right?
Well, and so here's the deal. What you're seeing is a contrast between a coach that really likes to tell it like it is and isn't afraid of truths, right? Rick Bowness is the kind of guy who will come out and he will say, this player isn't playing very well right now. And he's not doing it to call that player out or to harm that player. He's doing it because Rick Bowness believes that he can say the truth to his player. You're not playing your best right now, but guess what? We're going to get you playing your best, right? So he's the kind of guy who likes to bring the monster out of the closet, show it to everyone, and say, and this is how we're going to slay the monster, right? This is a stark contrast to what the Winnipeg Jets went through under Paul Maurice. Paul Maurice never brought up negatives about his players in the media. Paul Maurice was the kind of guy who refused to admit to what you were obviously seeing on the ice as a media member, as an analyst, as a fan, as anyone. We can look out there and say, Mark Scheifele is not giving his all tonight. There was no way that Paul Maurice was ever going to admit that. So what that did is it created a culture in Winnipeg where I think the Winnipeg Jets players never at all ever felt accountable to their fans, right? Or to the media. And I'm not saying that they need to, I'm going to say, you're not playing very well. And they need to say, yeah, Sean, you're right. I'm not saying that. But what I am saying is there needs to be, that definitely, I think, needs to exist with fans. And I think the media is just a conduit through which players say that to the fans. But if you are a fan and you're going and you're paying your hard-earned money to go watch a team that's not putting in a full effort, I think it's incumbent upon those players, that organization, to say, listen, we're letting you down. We realize we're letting you down, and we're going to fix it. Why? Because we value your time, your investment, and the hard-earned money that you put in to coming and watching us. That didn't exist with the Winnipeg Jets under Paul Maurice. And I think there are certain kinds of players who can take the shield that Paul Maurice put up in front of them and the fans and the media and get behind that shield and say, he's shielding us, but we need to do right. We need to do better. There are some players who will get behind that shield and say, there's no consequences, everybody. We get to do what we like. And I really think that latter example is what's happened with the Winnipeg Jets. There's not a feeling of accountability towards their fans, towards anyone who is saying to them, you aren't good enough. And when a new head coach came in and told them, you are not doing good enough, they couldn't handle it because for years they never had to.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think so. And I think Rick Bowness set the tone last year when he came in. Like I said, stripping the C. And I think the offseason, I want your thoughts on this. I think the offseason was set, the tone was set at the end of the year when guys like Kyle Connor and Connor Hellebuyck said, we don't want to be here for a rebuild. Am I wrong?
Oh, that's the big question mark right now in Winnipeg is the organization has said they are not interested in rebuilding. They're interested in retooling. Now, there's a couple reasons that maybe it's because of exactly what Kyle Connor said, and Nito Niederreiter is another one. Maybe Connor Hellebuyck's not going to be here, so maybe that doesn't matter. But those players are saying, we don't want to be a part of a rebuild. And they're basically saying to their general manager, if you start moving these guys and bringing in draft picks and prospects and we're not very good next year, you're going to get a call from my agent because I want out of town too, right? This isn't what I signed up for. That's not what I'm interested in. That could be one of the problems. It probably is one of the problems. The other is I do think that within the Winnipeg Jets organization, and I disagree with this, there is a feeling that if they don't put a winning team on the ice, the fans aren't going to show up. The reason I disagree with this is if you go back to 2017, the Winnipeg Jets missed the playoffs. Patrick Laine came rolling into town. It was one of the most exciting seasons in Winnipeg Jets history, and fans loved it. They ate it up, right? A playoff missing team they adored because they had a lot of pluck. They had a lot of talent. You could see there was something coming up, right? So I disagree with the second part, but regardless, the team itself, the organization has said they want to retool, and that's what's created all of these problems leading into what we're talking about, probably going to be getting to fairly soon with guys like Mark Scheifele and guys like Connor Hellebuyck. Because if you take a look, the Jets were able to do a retool trade with Pierre-Luc Dubois in what they got back for that player. Those players probably make the Jets just as good as they were even with losing Pierre-Luc Dubois. It's hard to make those trades, though, with teams like, let's say, I see it behind you right now. I think Connor Hellebuyck would be a great fit with the New Jersey Devils. Well, the New Jersey Devils want to win a cup this year. So what they want to do is they want to take their prospect pool, their big, fat, one of the best in the NHL prospect pools, and say, we'll give you this. You give us this guy so we can be good right now and you can be good in the future. The Winnipeg Jets don't want that. What they want is they want the New Jersey Devils to send some significant assets that make them really good right now down the road to Winnipeg so Winnipeg can compete this year. And I don't think the Devils are overly interested in that because the Devils want to try and win a cup. They feel like it's time. They did well in the playoffs last year. They're showing well. A really strong goaltender could send them a lot further down the road, but it's not going to do it if they subtract three really good forwards and a good defenseman out of the process. So the Jets have kind of painted themselves into a corner, and it's one of the reasons why we haven't seen Mark Scheifele and Connor Hellebuyck moved yet.
Yeah, that was one of my questions. You brought it up last week. I was actually listening to the Rob Peterson show when you were on talking about this exact subject, and I've been feeling this way with the trades this year when we saw Alex DeBrincat go and Pierre-Luc Dubois. Teams like that want to reload, and they want players back to keep them in the playoff picture. And I agree. we talked about this in Nashville too. I think the Jets probably should have embraced the rebuild, to
Oh,
be honest.
I completely agree. Completely agree. It's not, it's for the reason that I think the Jets should consider themselves lucky that they play in a hockey market where I'm going to give a shout out to Winnipeg Jets hockey fans here right now. The reason that there's been attendance issues, in my estimation, over the last little while with the Winnipeg Jets is because they have a team that is not giving their all. This is a blue collar town, right? Winnipeg Jets fans are people who go and put in a solid day of work and then they show up afterwards. Sometimes they're still in their work clothes, they're dusty, they're whatever. They want to come watch a team pull out the lunch pail and go at it. And what they've been witnessing is a very skilled bunch act a little bit lazy for a couple of years and really go to sleep at times and not put in the effort required to be a winning team. That grates on people who go and spend their lives grinding and working just to get enough money to go, buy a ticket and go enjoy some hockey, and see a team that does not reflect them, that does not put in the work that they put in life, right? So I think that what you do get out of Jets fans is if the team is not very good, if they're not winning, but they look like they've got a bright future and they're giving their all, I'm going to be the first to stand up and say Winnipeg Jets fans will go there. They'll support you. And so I think personally, it is a mistake for the Winnipeg Jets not to be rebuilding, because I think the kind of guys, if you had said Pierre-Luc Dubois, Mark Scheifele, Connor Hellebuyck, we're going to move these three players and they're going to make you really good right now. It opens you up to everyone in the league, because now these guys can make you better right now. And if you're a team ready to get better along the lines of a Buffalo Sabres, a New Jersey Devils, Detroit Red Wings, any team around the league that wants to win right now, if they've got a good prospect pool, you basically get to have your pick from that prospect pool, and out of it, find the next Connor Hellebuyck, find the next Mark Scheifele, find the next Pierre-Luc Dubois. I all along thought that should be the goal of the Winnipeg Jets. I can assuredly tell you, though, it is not. They want to retool. They want to make the playoffs this year. They want to stay in the fight.
Wow, I mean, that's really surprising. Do you think it should have started after 2018 or 2021? Because I know they made the run to the Western Conference Final in 2018, lost to Vegas, but they made it to the second round in the bubble and the different divisions. When do you think that should have started?
Well, if you are, I'm going to talk. I don't want to talk to like back it up too much, but
Right.
for your fans and for your audience members
Right.
who aren't overly familiar with the Winnipeg Jets, the Winnipeg Jets in 2018 probably should have won the Stanley Cup.
I agree.
Caught by a Vegas team that caught them by surprise, knocked them out. The Jets were so dominant that year. Heading into the playoffs, they were just an unbelievably dominant team. And that same team came back in 2019. Now, what the Jets decided to do was run it back. When now, if we're talking about retooling, that was the year to retool, because they had a whole bunch of defensemen that were going to be unrestricted free agents at the end of that year. And they decided they wanted to take the exact same team. They didn't want to mess with its chemistry, and they wanted to take a run at winning the cup that next year. And what we saw that year was a similar thing. The Jets were one of the best teams at the front end of the year, and then they fell off a cliff afterwards. I think from watching it, I could see it coming. At the beginning of the year, they were playing fairly poor teams. The Winnipeg Jets love winning come from behind games. They're one of the best teams in the league at it because they can skill their way into a victory time and time again. They fell in love with their ability to do that. But what it also meant was their effort level went way down. They'd pop up for 5 minutes in the third period and win a game, and then they'd do the same thing game after game after game. It started finally catching up with them. I think that's where the culture kind of went a little bit sour for the Winnipeg Jets. But 2019, they had to take a run at it. Maybe they should have tried to take Jacob Trouba at that time and traded him and brought in his replacement. Maybe they should have done the same thing with Tyler Myers, Ben Sherratt, a lot of the really good players that they lost at the time, so that the next year they didn't entirely clean out their defense core, which they've never really recovered from. That was the time to retool, if you ask me, but they chose not to, and they chose not to thinking we should have won the cup in 2018. We're only going to get better, and we're going to win it in 2019. So it made sense, but to me, At the same time, 2019 is the year that the culture seeped into it. Waiting to address it all these years later, that was the problem. The problem was there were obvious things that we were seeing in the media. We were calling out. We were calling out these lax efforts, the Jets' ability to score their way back into the game. Their coaching staff thought it was great. They loved their ability to do that. They never saw a problem with it. And if they did, which they probably did, they never told us about it. It sure didn't look like it got addressed in the dressing room. I think that, the big thing with the Jets was culture more than anything. And, roster makeup has something to do with that. But we're essentially at the stage where, Jim, the Jets have addressed their culture for the very first time this offseason. I'm saying it went wrong in 2018. They are just getting to it now. They just moved their captain, who they needed to strip of the C last year. They just moved Pierre-Luc Dubois, who essentially made it clear pretty much in the media and definitely behind the scenes that he didn't want to be in Winnipeg and he wanted out. They're starting to finally address this. It is 4 years too late to be starting to address the issue that plagued this team. And that's why I think, the idea I said of the cancer that seeped into this dressing room and how deep the tendrils have sunk, nobody knows. Nobody knows. So this is the start of trying to right the ship. I think it's the start of a battle that's going to take a number of years before they finally eradicate the issues.
Wow, that goes really deep. And you mentioned it before, Mark Scheifele, excuse me, and Connor Hellebuyck. Those two names have not been moved yet. Again, the reload, retool, it makes it difficult because teams know what, certain teams know what they can give up, not give up. Do you think we see them move before training camp? Do you think it becomes a storyline distraction when training camp starts? Or does it wait till next year, the trade deadline or at the draft?
So if you're trading at the trade deadline, and you watched the Rod Peterson show,
Yep.
So I'm going to get into this again. But let's say you're the Tampa Bay Lightning and you're going to take another crack at the cup, which they probably will, right? You're all in. Well, the Tampa Bay Lightning aren't at the trade deadline looking and saying, we need Mark Scheifele. Let's give you Evgeny Kuznetsov. Sorry, wrong team. Steve Stamkos. Let's give you Steve Stamkos. Okay. Well, that doesn't work, right? Because you add and then you subtract. The trade deadline is all about adding and not subtracting from your current roster. It's about sending future. So if the Winnipeg Jets are so intent on retooling, they can't take those guys to the trade deadline because the only trades they will make at that time is rebuilding trades. So if they are truly intent, and everything I hear is that they truly are intent on retooling, they have to move these players before the season starts because every team needs to get their house in order financially. They need to get up to the cap. It's too difficult to make trades in season. We've seen it before. So if the team that is eventually going to take on Connor Hellebuyck or Mark Scheifele is going to be able to get its financial house in order, it needs to make those trades before the season starts. So I do believe that those two players have to move. If the Winnipeg Jets want to retool, they have to move before the season starts. But that doesn't mean they won't take those players into training camp. If we've seen anything before, it's that the Winnipeg Jets and Kevin Cheveldayoff specifically, maybe the players mind, but the general manager does not mind at all sticking a problem in that dressing room and leaving his players to deal with it. He did it the last couple of years with Pierre-Luc Dubois. If you remember, he did it for like 4 years with Evander Kane until it absolutely erupted like a volcano. Kevin Cheveldayoff, and listen, if you're looking for clues as to why a team ends up with culture issues, maybe sticking players that are problematic and don't want to be in that room and forcing them to stay, and worse, forcing the players who are invested in that team to play with and have to handle that player the whole time. That's a recipe for things to go sour. And so this is a situation where Connor Hellebuyck's a pro. He's not going to create problems for the Winnipeg Jets. So if he has to stay, it's not a big deal. But the fact of the matter is Connor Hellebuyck has said he is going to go elsewhere when he is an unrestricted free agent next year. We suspect and have heard that it's the same kind of idea for Mark Scheifele. If that's the case, the Winnipeg Jets are not the kind of franchise that can let cornerstone players like that walk away for nothing, because you do not get UFAs to sign here. Everything that you do is draft and develop or trade. So you got to trade these guys, or the Winnipeg Jets are going to gut themselves and put themselves in a bad situation for years to come.
Yeah, I totally agree. Sticking on Scheifele for a minute, I've gone back and watched this hit over and over again on Jake Evans in 2021. To me, Mark Scheifele, since that hit's been a different player. I don't know if you've seen it. I'm an outsider. I've only, I watch the games and network and catch these games, but it just seems like he's missing that edge, especially in the playoffs again. I don't know. Maybe I'm just an outsider. I haven't seen it, but it just feels like there's something missing in his game. I don't know.
So you're not the first person to say that. So it's not an outsider thing because a lot of Winnipeg Jets fans believe the same thing. I personally think it's a cop out. I think it's a cop out by fans who think that was a clean hit to say the refs not only screwed us there, but they've screwed us ever since. They broke that player. That's what those refs did. I don't buy that for a second. I'm on the record as saying I thought that it was a bad hit.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I've thought that at the time. Nothing has had me waver from that. That's put me at odds with Winnipeg Jets fans for a long time. So be it. It's my job to be truthful and tell you what I think. I'm telling you what I think. It won't be the last time I take heat for that. But the year after that, Mark Scheifele was still a point per game player. In fact, he was tied for the third longest streak in the NHL of point per game seasons. It was Sidney Crosby's got what? He's got 18 in his back pocket now, 18 straight. And then Connor McDavid is at 9 or something like that. And Mark Scheifele and Brad Marchand were tied for third. And I think it was 6 or 7 straight point per game seasons. That was not the season that just passed, but the previous season that Mark Scheifele came out of that hit, was still a point per game player. And then this year, he altered his game a little bit and became more of a goal scorer and put up 40 goals for the first time in his career. So I think the culture issue is the biggest issue afflicting Mark Scheifele. And here's the deal. I think that if you are a team out there looking for a guy, for an offensive guy, for a guy who could potentially play all sides of the ice, for a big, strong body, I truly believe, and I've been on record saying this, I think Mark Scheifele could be one of the most important, if not the biggest offseason pickups for a team if the right team grabbed him. Because if the right team grabbed Mark Scheifele and brought him in and they had the right culture and they said, listen, Mark, this is what we expect of you. We expect this of you offensively. We expect this of you defensively. We expect this of you off the ice. We expect this of you with the interactions with your teammates. We expect this of you with the interactions of your fans. And you got a really strong, cultured organization that brought Mark Scheifele in. I say you get at least a 30, if not 40 goal scorer and a point per game player and a player who in the past has shown he's a very good two-way player. Mark Scheifele has all the tools to be one of the best players on any team that decides to pick him up if it's the right culture, the right coach, the right players in that dressing room. So if I'm an organization that feels that I have that kind of backbone, that proper culture and everything in place, and I need a player who can really pick things up, I'm going after Mark Scheifele because I think he could be huge. And when I say this, and this is no surprise, a lot of people are saying this as well. I don't know how they would make it work financially, but the Boston Bruins, I think, could turn Mark Scheifele into an absolute monster. If that's the case, if that's what happens, I go on the record saying I think it would be a really good move.
Got it. Got it.
When did I lose you, Jim?
You were saying bringing in, you were bringing in Mark Scheifele to a team that with the right culture.
Yeah. You want me to start that one again?
Yeah, absolutely. That would be great. Sorry, I don't know what happened.
Yeah, no worries. No worries. Yeah, I'll just run it back and say, but I truly believe that if you're a team that's looking for a big impact player in the offseason. I don't know that there's a bigger potential impact player that you could get than Mark Scheifele if you've got the right culture, the right coach, the right organization kind of thing. Because I do believe if you get players in there who are going to say to Mark, listen, this is what we expect of you on the ice. This is what we expect of you off the ice. This is what we expect of you with interactions with your teammates. This is what we expect from you interactions with your coaching staff. And this is what we expect with you interacting with the fans. I think that he falls into line. I think he can potentially be the biggest offseason grab by any team if you've got the right team and the right culture. And this isn't going to be a surprise. A lot of people look out there and take a look at the Boston Bruins, who lost what they lost. This is a team with a solid coach, a solid culture, a solid roster of players, a solid fan base. Everything's in place there. I know the money situation is tough, but if they could make that work, Mark Scheifele, I think, wearing a Boston Bruins jersey, could have a bounce back season, the likes of which make him one of the more dangerous players in the league this season, and could really spell off a lot of the loss they've experienced in this offseason.
Yeah, I was going to mention Boston. That was the first team that popped into my head when it came to where Mark Scheifele can go. I know that's like the big team. I know, but didn't he talk about like trying to follow Steve Yzerman? But wouldn't it just be best for him to just leave Winnipeg? I think just to get out of that culture, maybe find a new environment for him and his game and things like that, as you just talked about.
Well, like here's the deal: is Mark Scheifele is one of the leaders in the room where the culture went sour, right? Like he's overseen it for a long time. It has basically been Mark Scheifele, Blake Wheeler, and Connor Hellebuyck have been the three major players, especially once Dustin Byfuglien left. But the three major players in that dressing room since 2018, when things started to go a little bit sour. So it is under his leadership, under his and Blake Wheeler's leadership, that the problems have existed. I don't think that if you leave Mark Scheifele here, just like, hey, you took the C off Blake Wheeler, but you left him in the dressing room, even though they tried to move him last year and they didn't like what they had. They didn't want to buy him out. Well, you left him in the dressing room, took the C off him, and by the end of the year, the players one by one, as they were sticking knives in the back of their coach in their post-season press conferences, they essentially all swore fealty to Blake Wheeler. They said, hey, he may have had the C taken off, but that doesn't mean he's not his leader. So Rick Bowness removed the C from Blake Wheeler to give an opportunity for other players to step up and be the leaders. And those players said, we don't want to be the leaders. We want Blake Wheeler to be the leader, right? So the way that dressing room is now, I really think you need to clean out the culture carriers in order to try and fix things. And Mark Scheifele has no doubt been a culture carrier with the Winnipeg Jets. But I don't think for a second, as I go back to this, that Mark Scheifele couldn't get into a different place and learn from different leaders in a different culture and find a way to approach the game in a different way, especially culture-wise, and not become an impact player. But him going back into that dressing room, I think achieves pretty much the same thing as happened last season by leaving Blake Wheeler in that dressing room. And I think most people can take a look and see what happened in the end and think that was an unmitigated disaster.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think you got to just get rid of it. And if guys want out, move them, try to move them. I know everybody can play armchair GM, got to do it now, this and that. We've seen general managers wait because they're looking for the right price. But I agree with you. It's going to be hard to find come in season, especially with this cap going into this year. Connor Hellebuyck, you mentioned it, New Jersey, he could be a perfect fit for them. Do you expect if he hits the open market or he gets traded to a team, if somebody signs him to a Vasilevsky type deal, or can they convince him to take less money on a short-term deal in a window?
Well, I'll tell you this. It's very interesting because for the longest time, Connor Hellebuyck has been saying, he said it to me in the playoffs earlier this year, nothing matters to him now other than winning a Stanley Cup. And so to me, saying he wants to be, and I know I'm not saying he said this, but the idea out there that he wants 9.5, $10 million or whatever it is per year, those two are conflicting statements, right? Because if you end up being that player, that goaltender that takes that kind of money, it means that the team can't spend it elsewhere, and it makes it harder for them to build a winning roster, right? And the one thing I think that we're taking a look at here is the idea outside of Tampa, who has, tax advantages that most other teams in the league don't have, so they don't get players taking less because they know they're going to keep more because of taxes. The $10 million goalie experiment has failed, right? You had Carey Price in Montreal, and he was great, and he was that team, and he made that team far more competitive than they probably were had you take him out of the lineup, most definitely than they would have been. But they never won a cup with him, right? And if you take a look even at Sergei Bobrovsky this year, that has been a little bit of a disaster since he signed that. But he popped up at the right time and showed up, but they didn't quite win, right? And who wins on the other side of it? Well, a team with not the strongest goaltender, like last year, where you've got the Colorado Avalanche who win with not the strongest goaltender. And here's the one thing I'll say, and you'll get this as a New Jersey Devil. I see all the New Jersey Devil stuff on the back of your wall, and you think about some of the great goaltenders over the years. Dominic Hasek when he finally won, when he was in with the Red Wings, and Patrick Waugh and all those players. We think of those players, the Brodeurs of, yesteryear and the days of lore as the guys who won cups. But how good was the New Jersey Devils defense core in front of Brodeur?
Yeah.
All of these goalies that we talk about as being historically amazing goaltenders all played behind ferocious defenses. And I think what we're finding in the last couple of years here is teams with ferocious defenses like Colorado had and like Vegas had can win with not the best goaltender. But I don't know that we look around and see an example of a goalie going all the way with kind of a half decent defense core. I don't know that your fans will correct me if I'm wrong here, but I can't think off the top of my head of any teams that went out and won with a bad. Well, here's sorry, the Pittsburgh Penguins.
I was just gonna say
one
Pittsburgh,
year with North,
yeah,
because their defense was bereft, and they kind of belied analytics that year. But there is the example, so it does happen. But I go and I stand by the idea that the $10 million goaltender has been a failure at the NHL level. So if Connor Hellebuyck wants to go down that road, he's basically going to force his general manager into either finding really great young defensemen who aren't getting paid yet. So maybe you go to Buffalo, right? With a ferocious upcoming defense core and a team that already knows how to score. And you say, I'm going to go in Connor Hellebuyck, and I'm going to catch that team. I'm going to get paid $9.5 million and catch that with a bunch of young defensemen who are going to be good enough to win cups before they need to go get paid. And I'm going to get locked in, and we're going to win a couple cups, and then that team's going to experience a bunch of problems, right? Maybe you do that, but I will say this to the question that you asked. If you're Connor Hellebuyck and you're asking for $10 million a year, it's almost akin to saying the money is more important than me winning, which is the opposite of what he's been saying for years. For Connor Hellebuyck, he wants a cup. So if he wants a cup, it does get easier to win it if you take an $8.5 million contract than if you take 10.5.
Especially like with, you see with New Jersey, what they've done, Tom Fitzgerald, just having guys buy in, wanting to play there, the culture. You talked about it. Like, he's like, guys, you want to win, you got to leave money on the table.
Yeah.
We have to build a team around you guys. So if that's the message, say the Devils trade for him hypothetically, right? I think that's something, he's always said it. Like, we're going to let guys just experience New Jersey and decide for themselves. And that's what he's taking the approach with Toffoli this year when they traded for him, and with Meyer. If they traded for Hellebuyck, I think he takes the same approach. And I think maybe Connor Hellebuyck realizes, hey, wait a minute, this team is going to be good. I'm going to actually have a chance to win here. Maybe I don't need all that money, and I'll be the backbone and the goaltender that puts them over the edge.
Yeah, so I'm all in on the Devils. I love watching them play. Boy, oh boy, Devils fans, you are experiencing a treat. This is what I'm talking about. Last year when they didn't make the playoffs, I watched them and I thought, if I was a Devils fan, I know they're not going to the playoffs, but I would love to watch this team. They are so exciting and the future's so bright. And then they turned it into what they did this year. And you get the sense it's only going to build. if you're Connor Hellebuyck and you want to be part of a potential, not just win a cup, because maybe what he could do is maybe he could facilitate a trade, come in for this year, win a cup, and then take off and go chase the money next year. And who cares what happens? He's got his cup. But if you want to be a goaltender who's part of a potential dynasty going forward, I take a look at the New Jersey Devils and I say, it's right there on a platter. I'm going to go there. I'm going to find a contract that allows me to fit in there for a number of years. And the next 5 or 6 years, the Devils could do some really dangerous things. And if you're Connor Hellebuyck with the confidence that Connor Hellebuyck has, you take a look at that and say, I am going to be the last line of defense that is going to time and time and time again bail this team out in the few times they require me bailing them out, because they can score, they can defend, they can do everything. Like to me, it's an obvious fit. But New Jersey, from what I've heard, isn't willing to pay the price to get that goaltender. Maybe his financial ask is a big barrier in that, but as of right now, the one thing we see from Kevin Cheveldayoff is he does not move guys until he gets what he wants, and clearly he hasn't got what he's wanted from New Jersey yet.
Yeah, that's the big thing. That what's the price? What are they asking for? Because my guess is and understanding is that Vitek Vanacek's probably going to go back, or Schmid, one of the goaltenders is going back to Winnipeg in return. And if I'm Tom Fitzgerald, I'm not giving up Akira Schmid for in a package just because of what I've seen. But I agree. If Hellebuyck's there, look, the times they need to be bailed out, which you saw against Carolina, that issue got exposed. They need goaltending. He's a perfect fit. Question for you. You believe the belief of the $10 million. I agree. I don't think goalies should be paid $10 million. My stance has always been 5 years max on a goalie contract, just because these 8-year deals just don't ever seem to work out. Same with like the $10 million.
So you're saying you got to go like 4 or 5 years only?
Yeah.
I think these are all balances, and I think going back to what you're saying about not moving, what you were talking about moving to the Winnipeg Jets. I had a really interesting conversation with a GM one time who told me that he never goes out and tries to win trades. He tries to make sure that there are good things going both ways, right? So that next time you need to trade, the guy will pick up the phone because you didn't fleece him, right? And so The one thing I always think about goaltenders is, so this is, I think that the Buffalo would be a really good fit for Connor Hellebuyck as well. And if I'm the Jets, I am eyeing up Devin Levi, right? Great up and coming goaltender. He could be the next, great Canadian goaltender. It's been a while since we've had one of those, but he's at every level looked like he could do that. And I've had people say, well, no, you can't give up on that guy. He's going to be great. But if you're getting Connor Hellebuyck, you're getting Connor Hellebuyck because you believe, A, the Buffalo Sabres can score goals in bunches right now. B, they've got a defense that looks like it's going to be ferocious and fairly quick. And C, you're ready. Like, it's enough. They've missed the playoffs too many times. They need to take the step that New Jersey just took this last year, right? They need to get in there. And if you get Connor Hellebuyck, you get a goaltender that is good. Like, what you're getting from Connor Hellebuyck, and you're going to get it right now. So, I would make that trade because Devon Levi may be good in 3 or 4 years, but you need to make the playoffs. And here, if you know you're going to get a good goaltender, what do you need Devon Levi in net for at this stage, right? You've solved your problem in the crease. So there you go. I'd say the financial situation is kind of the same thing. A fan is always going to say, I don't want to sign him for 7 years because I know in year 6 and year 7, he's going to be a bad goaltender and that's going to suck. Well, that's the balance you got to strike, right? If you want that really good guy, you got to pay them beyond the years they're going to be good. It's not how it works. Every player is trying to sign a deal that he can be great value in at the front end of it and bad value in the back end of it. Why? Because every good player in the NHL got underpaid in their first 2, 3, 4 good years before they finally made bank, right? So that's the way it works. They're trying to make it up on the back end. So I always look at it from this perspective. I think, you go out and you make that signing because you get the player you have now. He's going to be good for 4 or 5 years. If he's good in year 6 and 7, well, there you go. It all worked out. And if he's not, well, then it's probably some other GM's job to figure that out because I won't be here anymore. And that guy can bury that contract in Arizona or whatever team is taking on bad contracts at that time.
You mentioned the culture. This has been a theme of this podcast here with Sean Reynolds. The culture, is that something, and again, I don't want to like the low hanging fruit. We saw it in Calgary. You've seen it in other places. You mentioned it before. You got to pay a Canadian tax. Is that why guys have wanted out of Winnipeg? Just the culture of the room and the culture that's there and not winning? Because we see so many guys out of Winnipeg, like Evander Kane and Jacob Trouba, Bufflin, Dubois, like all these guys say they want out. Is it changing the culture, or they have to win as well? Because it may go hand in hand, because we've seen that in New Jersey. But I just want your perspective from the Winnipeg Jets and from the city of Winnipeg, why guys just want out, because I know it's low hanging fruit, and we can always say, oh, guys don't want to play in Canada or Winnipeg or whatever. But I just would like to get your perspective on that.
Well, it's not the simplest answer. Taxes is
Right.
going to be part of it, right? I
Yeah.
do know that there's some American players on the Jets who have not been the biggest fans of playing in Canada. COVID definitely
Oh,
created
yeah.
some issues with that, right? The way that the borders were, and so I mean, there's issues that exist there that certain players aren't as likely to play here. I do think that that's just the way it goes. If you're an American player, there's how many teams in the NHL? 25 of them are in the States, right? So the chances are you're going to end up playing in the States. When you don't, Americans are lucky. They're the guys that really don't have to travel. If you're from Sweden or Finland or Russia or whatever, you got to leave your homeland, leave your culture, leave your home language, and you got to go elsewhere. Americans, for the most part, they're spoiled like that, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes spoiled people act spoiled, and that's the way a Canadian would view it, right? Maybe it's wrong not to see that, but I take a look at someone who's in Winnipeg making huge bank with really great fans. They're saying we don't want to be here because they'd rather be in the States. Well, that does strike me as someone being a little bit spoiled. But hey, they're players. They get to do what they want. I don't get a say in that. I shouldn't get a say in that. So they can go do whatever they want to do. Money is or taxes is an issue. Maybe the culture is an issue. I'm going to say this. I was born about an hour from here. I was born in paradise. When I grew up mowing my lawn, I'd finish mowing my lawn and I'd run and I'd dive off my dock and I'd go for a
Oh,
swim. I'd hop out, hop in the boat, go out, head out fishing for a couple of hours. And that was my life. And there's about 10 spots within an hour of Winnipeg that are that. They are paradise, right? Winters are cold. I grew up in it. I don't have a problem in it. My kids, they grew up in it. They don't have any kind of problem in it. But if you come from somewhere else, if you're a hockey player who came out of Las Vegas or Arizona or Florida or California, you're going to have trouble with the winters here because they are bone chillingly cold. I'm not going to say anything about it other than that, right? But and the other part about it is like Winnipeg is a smaller city. I love Winnipeg. I choose to live here. I've lived here for the majority of my life, but it's not New York. It's not Chicago. It's not Dallas. It doesn't have all the stuff that you want to do there. I lived in Toronto for a number of years. I really like music. Every concert I ever wanted to see seemed to come rolling through Toronto. There's a ton of bands I never get to see because they don't come rolling through Winnipeg. So it's a smaller town. And some guys that they just want to live in the hey, if I had my choice of living anywhere I wanted to in the world, I'm not sure where I would be, but maybe it wouldn't be Winnipeg, right?
yeah.
These guys have that option, right? So it's a whole bunch of these different things. But the one thing that should never be lost in this is Winnipeg Jets fans are phenomenal fans. There's a great hockey culture in this town. The conversation that you and I are having, I love talking hockey like this, and I walk around in Winnipeg and I do it everywhere. Players are treated with adulation. The organization is first class when it comes to treating its players. So there's a lot of reasons to come to Winnipeg and play hockey in Winnipeg. There's plenty of reasons to not play hockey in Winnipeg, just as I think there would be in a lot of other markets, maybe less reasons. I was in New York and did a Hockey Night in Canada game in New York earlier this year in both Long Island and in, against the Rangers. And it's gorgeous. And I love New York and I love Chicago. I love traveling and doing those things. But, Winnipeg is not as bad as people make it out to be. But if you want something bigger and better, Winnipeg is not bigger and better.
Yeah, no, that's a great answer. Just a couple more questions before we wrap up here. Kevin Cheveldayoff, you mentioned it. He's got to change some things. Is he on the hot seat this year if they don't do anything. Like if they don't make the playoffs, even if they make the playoffs and things don't change, is his time up in Winnipeg?
I'm gonna go on the record as saying I don't think there is any temperature control on Kevin Cheveldayoff's seat. If he hadn't been on the hot seat before this, I'm of the opinion that he's not going to be on the hot seat. Like to me, it is evidently clear that under Kevin Cheveldayoff, the Jets culture went sour and he sat idly by for far too many years and did nothing about it until the point that this team now needs to be retooled or rebuilt. One of the two. Either way, when you retool or you rebuild, you say it went wrong. We need to change it to make it right. Well, Kevin Cheveldayoff has been the Jets general manager since 2011. We're going into 23-24. That is plenty of time to get it right. And he didn't. So the idea that, well, never mind, did he not get it right? He had all the makings of a championship team and seemed to sit idly by as the wheels started falling off, right? Like that, this could have been halted and arrested, and someone could have come in with a little bit more of a finger on the pulse of like how to build culture and a championship and all those kind of things. That clearly was not something that Kevin Cheveldayoff pulled off. So the fact that under Kevin Cheveldayoff, this team's ownership has watched him build the team up, build it into something very capable, and then watched it fall apart. And are now saying, okay, tear it apart and start over again, tells you all you need to know. Kevin Cheveldayoff is the de facto general manager in Winnipeg. I don't see that changing anytime soon unless they entirely explode in embarrassing fashion.
So you're saying like if that 18-wheeler happened like it could have happened last year, maybe he's gone.
Well,
Maybe.
I think that the idea that they went under Paul Maurice for year after year after year after year, never made any changes, and then the year when he walked away, rather than going out to find a coach to solve the question that we talked about off the top of the podcast, yeah. Is it the coach or is it the team? Well, when Paul Maurice left through 2/5 of the season last year, that was a good time to bring in a coach and try to find out if it's the coach or if it's the team. That's when you needed to ask and answer that question, right? Instead, They put it off until the next year, and now another year down the drain because of it, in embarrassing fashion, right? This like let me just put it this way. If this was any other market, Kevin Cheveldayoff would not be doing the retooling and rebuilding. I'm confident of that. Unless it's a market where they couldn't afford to hire a new guy or something like that, we could play this game and you tell me if it's Montreal, is he still there? No. If it's Ottawa, is he still there? No. If it's Boston, is he still there? Right? Like there. I know that Mark Chipman, the owner of the Winnipeg Jets, he loves consistency, and he wanted to have Paul Maurice be the coach for like 15 years and the general manager. Like he likes consistency and he likes the idea that they have the patience to wait out the high times and the low times. And I know that he thinks other organizations don't have that they're knee jerk and they panic and they do things. But I think what we've seen in the past here is a team that was put together, and Kevin Cheveldayoff did a really good job. It's like baseball. Some guys are starters, some guys are closers. Kevin Cheveldayoff did a really good job with the Winnipeg Jets as a starter. He clearly showed he did not know for 2019, 20, 21, 22, 23 what it took to be a closer. And sometimes that's what you need to do in sports. You need to bring in the guy who gets it started and the guy who closes it out, right? Anaheim won like that. Brian Burke walked in. He was the closer. He got a couple of really good guys. He went out and he got Chris Pronger. He got Nieder. Yeah, well, I think the guy before him got Niedermeyer, but he finished the pieces off to get them over the top, right? Kevin Cheveldayoff could clearly never do that. So maybe that's the reason. Maybe the Jets are looking at him and saying, well, he's a good starter. Let him get it started again. And then maybe we'll go for a closer next time. But I don't think that's it. I think Kevin Cheveldayoff and Mark Chipman have a really good relationship. They like working with each other, and they're just going to keep, letting him take a crack at it and see if he can learn from his lessons.
That's a great answer. And I see that similarities what's going on with the Yankees right now in baseball with Steinbrenners and Brian Cashman. Just the GM just can do no wrong there. we talked about it earlier too, and to wrap the bow up on this. Expectations this season, we've said it. It could either finish first, they can finish dead last. What
I
do you
don't think
think?
they can
Where do?
finish first.
Yeah, well, there's somebody's got to fit. So 4 through 8 in a division. Does this team make the playoffs?
Well, I think there's too many questions to be answered before. Like I could say yes or I could say no. I think it would be an uneducated estimate at that stage because we don't know what's going to happen with. Like I still fully, like I said, I expect Mark Scheifele and Connor Hellebuyck to move before the season starts. I need to see what they get back because essentially you're losing, potentially your best forward and probably your best player in Connor Hellebuyck out of that lineup. So what you get back is really going to determine what happens. I will say this. I think that the Jets, I think the Pierre-Luc Dubois trade shows us this. I think the Jets are going with a different philosophy. I think they're trying to be a little bit more like a team like the Seattle Kraken, right? Who have a really solid lineup, players 1 through 12 and 1 through 7 on the back end. And in that, not a ton of star power, but really hard-working guys up and down the lineup that will grind you. And I think that the players that they picked up from LA show that they're going to go in that direction because the Jets have been the opposite. The Jets have been soft as baby food,
Oh yeah, yeah,
as Skippy peanut butter, right? They
yeah.
want to play perimeter. They don't want to go to the net. That was a huge theme for years under Paul Maurice that they just refuse to go to the front of the net because they want to score at distance. Really good players can score from distance. Goals from distance dry up the harder it gets, and the closer you get to the playoffs. Which is why the Jets always start high and finish low because they score when it's easy. They don't score when it's hard. So they're trying to switch into that. I think it's the right thing to do. I think it's the right idea, at least to balance some of the skill they have, the Kyle Connor kind of skill, the Nikolai Ehlers skill with harder nosed players like they picked up with Alex Iafoli and that they have with Nino Niederreiter and players like that. So I think they're going in the right direction. But I need to see that I see the makings of a cake. I need to see the rest of the ingredients that are going to go into that cake before I can say that. But as of right now, this day and what's happened up to this day, I think the Jets fall out of the playoffs this upcoming season.
Well, thanks, Sean, for that answer. I mean, look, it's so hard to predict this time of year if guys make playoffs or anything like that and where teams finish in the division like this and that.
I won't shy away from picks. Like if we go and it's the beginning of the season, you want to have me back, I'll tell you exactly what I think. I'm couching it because there's a lot of coaching to be done right now.
Absolutely. No, and I'd love to have you back on. Let's do like some season picks and just for the fun of it, always stay with the predictions and everything like that. But this has been such a pleasure just to talk hockey with you here on the podcast, get the Winnipeg
Likewise.
Jets perspective and just meeting you at the draft and just getting to just know you and everything. And it's just been great. And thank you again for coming on the Full Press NHL podcast.
Anytime, Jim. I had a blast. Thanks for having me.
Hey, guys, you can get this episode on iTunes, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast. This has been the Full Press NHL podcast. Your host, Jim Biringer, with Sportsnet reporter, Winnipeg Jets reporter Sean Reynolds on Hockey Night in Canada. Guys, take care. Enjoy the rest of the offseason.